On Sunday, for the first time in well over 30 years, something interesting happened during a Jets game. The fascinating spectacle didn't take place on the field of play, but on the sidelines where Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver Antonio Brown decided to quit in the middle of the third quarter. He took off his shoulder pads, ripped off his shirt, pranced off the field while his team was still playing. And at that point, they actually were losing to the Jets. And you could almost excuse this behavior if the sheer shame of losing to the Jets is what drove him off the field. It would at least be understandable, but that doesn't appear to be the motivating factor. Now, there are conflicting reports about what led to his leaving the field. Brown's camp claims that the coach told him to go into the game, but Brown refused because he had an ankle injury and couldn't play, and then the coach cut him on the spot. That's what they're saying. The coach disputes that version of events. It's important to note here that Brown is a liar. He's a horrible teammate on literally every team he's ever played on, and he has a history of quitting on his teams, all of his teams. He's quit on all of them. So there's no reason to believe his version. Also, here's how it looked as he left the field. Watch.
Very odd situation. Antonio Brown boiled over, very upset on the sideline, took off his shoulder pads. Mike Evans, O.J. Howard trying to convince him to keep them on. Obviously, they were unable to do so. He tossed his shoulder pads, stripped off his shirt and glove, threw those into the crowd, then ran across the field while the teams were still on the field, giving the crowd a peace out sign. I'll let you know when we hear something official on his status.
You know, you don't normally expect a guy with a crippling leg injury to dance and do jumping jacks as he's leaving the field. So no, I think he simply quit on his team in the middle of the game. That much is obvious. The Bucs did go on to win by 4 points, although morally speaking, beating the Jets by 4 points is equivalent to losing by 10 to a real NFL team. But in any case, the head coach of the Bucs announced in the post-game press conference that Brown was no longer on the team. Meanwhile, Brown took a private jet back to his house in the middle of the game. And when he got back to his house, he released a rap song. Now, I know you may be worried that I'll play the song for you, but you should know that I would never waste your time like that. Just kidding. Of course I will. Here it is.
I'm from the pit, not the palace. I'm kind of stylish. Lifestyle lavish. Jump in the coupe with no mileage. Run it. Style it. I'm from the pit, not the palace. I gotta run it. Style it. Hit on the gas, make it growl it. Jump in the coupe with no mileage.
Well, there's no question that the man is a poet. Maybe there's a little question, mostly because nobody knows what he was saying there. It sounds like he was rapping with 10 Jolly Ranchers in his mouth. But artistry aside, as an athlete, Brown's career is finished, as it should be. He's an egomaniac, he's a crybaby, he's a quitter. He abandoned his team in the middle of a game. And that's the cardinal sin in sports, to quit. Or it used to be. But that was before the era of Simone Biles, when quitting athletes are now viewed as heroes, or at least as victims who deserve our unending sympathy. And so that quickly became the narrative in this case also. The AP published a piece with this headline about Antonio Brown. It says, Antonio Brown's mental health is no joke. Internet commenters were chastised for daring to make jokes about the whole situation. Quote from the writer Rob Maddie, he scolds us, quote, Brown's mental health is no joke to be trivialized by a meme. Yeah, I mean, you heard his rap song. This is a tortured artist we're dealing with. Let us not trivialize him. It's not as though he's trivialized himself, right? Maddie argued that even if Brown is out of the league forever now, he should still, quote, get the benefit of various mental health services the NFL offers players and team personnel. The other sports writers chimed in. Ross Tucker said on Twitter, I expressed significant concern about Antonio Brown's mental health over 2 years ago. The man needs help. And then writer Bakari Sellers tweeted, Antonio Brown is unstable and needs mental health treatment. The league doesn't care as long as he runs routes and catches passes. Without immediate help and no football, bad things could happen. Someone needs to wrap their arms around him. Now, this again is a grown man we're talking about. Someone needs to wrap their arms around him? The author Malcolm Gladwell echoed these concerns. He says, I'm stunned by the lack of sympathy for Antonio Brown. He's clearly struggling. Is this how we treat people who are going through difficult times? Struggling. The poor dear. The poor multimillionaire athlete. How dare we be so callous to a person suffering through such a difficult time? You know, I just finished reading a book about the Donner Party, which of course is the group of 19th century pioneers who got stuck in the mountains on the way to California, and half of them starved or froze to death, and then their corpses were eaten by the other half. And needless to say, Their whole experience was kind of a bummer, but it pales in comparison to the plight of a Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver. I mean, no soul has ever suffered so much as him. On Monday afternoon, the media asked Brown's former head coach about the incident, and the questioning mostly revolved around this issue of poor Antonio's mental health. Listen.
You've been someone that's expressed genuine care and concern for Antonio. How tough was it for you to see what happened yesterday and to make that call?
Yeah, it's very hard. And I wish him well. I hope if he needs help, get some. And it's very hard because I do care about him.
And was there any type of conversation with him before you made that decision post game? And was there any sort of mental health evaluation performed on him before he left the stadium?
I have no idea.
Mental health evaluation performed on him before he left the stadium? It's an NFL team. It's not Arkham Asylum. How would that work exactly? Meanwhile, back on social media, thousands of random people who also apparently happen to be expert neurologists all decided that Antonio Brown must have CTE, which is the brain condition brought on by repeated blows to the head. It's been declared over and over again that Brown isn't at fault for any of his actions. He got hit in the head one too many times, and somehow, though nobody can really explain how, that caused him to act like an enormous jerk. Now, the problem with this diagnosis, of course, is that the people making it are utterly and completely full of crap. CTE is still quite mysterious. We don't know for sure how it relates to football injuries, or if it does. And even if it does, we don't know how it would cause people to act in certain ways, or if it does. In other words, CTE is an excuse for Antonio Brown, a rationalization with no evidentiary basis, and which ignores the fact that Brown has been a selfish jerk for his entire career. It's not the compounded result of 10 years worth of concussive episodes. He's always been like this. So that is, again, an excuse. And the same can be said about the whole mental health angle in general. You see, all of this is part of the general effort by so many in our culture to remove agency from the individual, to turn everybody into victims, into patients, into sufferers. None of us choose to act in one way or another way. Rather, the actions occur, the choices are made, and we are the victims of the results if they don't go our way. It's like we're all constantly pleading insanity for ourselves and one another in the court of public opinion. Don't blame anybody for anything. All bad choices are the fruits of mental health problems. And blaming someone for a mental health problem is like blaming them for arthritis. And that's the attitude anyway, and it's totally ridiculous. There are crazy people in this world who cannot control themselves, who shouldn't be held morally responsible for their actions, but those people aren't playing in the NFL. They're sitting on park benches arguing with squirrels. You know those kinds of people when you meet them. They aren't mentally with it. They aren't competent. They can't care at all for themselves. That's not the case for Antonio Brown. It's not the case for most of the garden variety jerks and a-holes who get by on the mental health excuse these days. For them, the problem is not mental deficiencies, but deficiencies of character. See, we used to talk about and acknowledge things like character and virtue before we decided that all of the jackasses and schmucks in the world are actually mental patients. And in Antonio Brown's case, it's not difficult to pinpoint where his trouble really began. It begins with this. He's a pampered, coddled superstar athlete. And so at the age of 33, he's been a pampered, coddled superstar athlete for most of his life, going back to high school. And that means that he almost always gets his way. It means people bend over backwards to accommodate him and satiate him. It means they make excuses for him, just like they're doing right now. They give him more chances than he deserves, just like they're doing right now. My dad used to tell me that it's good to get rejected sometimes. It's good to fail because it builds character. And you have to learn how to deal with not getting what you want. But there are some people who have never had to learn that lesson. And they end up morally stunted as a result. It's called being entitled. It's not that complicated. Most people in our culture today suffer from this entitlement disease to one degree or another. A guy like Antonio Brown has it terminally. Except it's not really a disease because it's developed as a result of his own choices, his own moral habits. Again, it's not complicated. He's not a victim. And the more he's treated like one, the worse the problem gets. And that's why Antonio Brown, and also, of course, his army of enablers, are all today canceled. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with all your friends.